Hi, I'm Donna from xoxsew. You may have watched my previous tutorial on how to sew quarter circle blocks. This time, we're going to trim them so they're all nicely squared up and ready to be sewn with other blocks. Before we get started, it's important to note that quarter circle blocks come in different sizes and finish in different ways. In this video, I'll be demonstrating a quarter circle block that finishes with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. That means when it's sewn onto another block, the seam will be right up against the edge of the circle. To follow along, you'll need a sharp rotary cutter, a ruler, and a cutting mat. I prefer the Fiskars cutting mat because it has the dotted marks within the 1-inch squares that I'll be referring to in this video. If your cutting mat doesn't have these marks, you can easily make them yourself by making a temporary mark on your cutting mat. I'll be using quarter circle blocks from the Sunset Bliss quilt pattern. You can grab a copy at xoxsew.com or find the link in the description box below. Alright, let's do this. I'll be referring to this part of the block with the convex edges as template A, and this part of the block with the concave edges as template B. I'm working on a block that needs to be trimmed to a 6.5 inch square. Because we're leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance here, template A should be 6.25 inches. The first thing we're going to do is trim the straight edges of template B. Here's how yours will look if you're right-handed. If you're a lefty, you can look at the description box below the video with a timestamp marked left-handed tutorial to jump to that part. Put your block on the cutting mat so that the edges of template A are along the 6.25 inch marks. Your block should have a little overage on all sides, so there's room to trim your block. Now take your ruler on a 6.5 inch line. Notice you'll have a 1/4 inch of template B left over here. Trim this edge. I'm a lefty, so I'm going to skip this awkward part. We're going to trim the other straight edge of template B. Turn your block and put the newly trimmed side along the cutting mat, placing the template A edges at a 1/4 inch here and 6.25 inch here. Notice the rest of the edges will probably still be bigger than 6.5 inches. Remember, that's a good sign because that'll give us room to trim this block nicely. Once again, put the edge of the ruler on the 6.5 inch line and trim. Now that the template B sides are nice and straight, we'll place those sides along the straight edges of the cutting mat. It's time to clean up the template A edges. Put the edge of the ruler on the 6.5 inch line and trim. One more side to go. We'll turn the block this way, so once again, place it along the straight edges of the cutting mat. See that all the edges are all squared up except this one last edge. Let's trim this last edge on the 6.5 inch line. Now you've got a 6.5 inch block with a 1/4 inch seam allowance here and here. Here's how it'll look if you're lefty like me. The vertical 0 inch line is where we'll be doing the trimming. Put your block on the cutting mat so that the edges of template A are on the 1/4 inch mark here and on the horizontal 6.25 inch mark here. You should have some fabric overages along all the edges so there's room to trim. Place your ruler on the 0 line. Notice you'll have a 1/4 inch of template B left over. Okay, let's trim. Next, we're going to trim the other edge of template B. Turn your block and put the newly trimmed side along the cutting mat. Notice the rest of the edges will probably still be bigger than 6.5 inches. Remember, that's a good sign because that'll give us room to trim this block nicely. Once again, put the edge of the ruler on the 0 inch line and trim. It's time to clean up the template A edges. Now that the template B sides are nice and straight, we'll place those sides along the block dimensions. That's 6.5 inches. Put the edge of the ruler on the 0 inch line and trim. Alright, we've got one more side to go. You'll see that all the edges run along the 6.5 inch lines. Let's trim this last edge on the 0 inch line. And that's it! We now have the proper block size, a 6.5 inch square block with a 1/4 inch seam allowance here and here. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please like and subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for more videos and helpful sewing tips. Thanks for watching.